Sorry, the camera is being temperamental, so I need to wait until someone gives me permission to start.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Right. We will get underway formally. And I'll say hello, good afternoon. We haven't met. I'm James Kirkup. I'm a fellow in the Social Market Foundation, among other things. Very pleased to have you here today for this. Come here. There's a pretty spaced out way.
Space rated stand.
There are, if you'd rather, instead of saying at the door. So we are here for this Fringe on Fraud, brought to you in partnership with our friends at Nationwide Building Society, and their delightful new logo, which you all have appreciated, on the banner there. And later, Jim will show you the tattoo he's just had to demonstrate his commitment to the rebranding of Nationwide Building Society. Sign up for the tattoo on the way out. Housekeeping, not a lot of it from me. I think there's no fire drill plan, so bells and whistles do go off and panic and run screaming out of that door there. The other thing is that camera there is currently live streaming this event to the SMS YouTube channel. Is there a hashtag person thing? Anyway, it's on the internet. It twitters over anyway. So anyway, it's on YouTube. So bear that in mind when you come to Q&A later on. If you're taking part in the conversation, you're not just talking to the friends in the room, you're also talking to the internet, and the recording of this session will stay online. So that's just bear that in mind. Also, when we come to when we come to questions, I'm a recovering journalist for the horror of speeches masquerading as questions. So if you are going to ask a question, at least list the intonation of your voice at the end to pretend it's a question when you're giving your mini speech. So that, I think, is all from me. We have a large and illustrious panel. I'm not going to introduce them. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and explain to you who they are, what they're here for, and what their view on the pernicious issue of fraud is. We started with Jim Winchester, who's the glorious and title Director of Economic Crime. Director of Opposing Economic Crime. Not carrying it out. Director of Economic Crime at Nationwide Building Society. Jim will kick us off.
Thank you. Tattoo's still quite sore at the moment, very fresh, so forgive me if I don't show my tattoo today. Thank you for joining the Fringe event. It's very kind of you for so many people to turn up. The core focus for Nationwide is how we prevent so many consumers becoming victims of fraud. We all know about the economic and social cost of fraud. It's not just pounds and pence, but it's actually lives changed forever. And we often think about the harm caused by crimes such as theft and burglary and violent crime, and it's time that we start to think about fraud and scams in the same way. We wanted to work with SMS on this because at the heart of their approach is kind of bringing people together to develop evidence-based policies, and we think that's exactly what we need to tackle fraud and scams. It's an extremely important report. It shows how we can design the right policies to tackle fraud and scams, and we strongly believe that through taking a consistent, comprehensive and collaborative approach, we can beat the fraudsters. So let's talk about the government's fraud strategy very quickly. It is a small step forward, and whilst the proof is in the pudding, some of the measures, such as the eradication of sin farms, the ban of cold calling and things like that, will make a little bit of a difference to some of the crack criminals, but it is nowhere near enough. So these criminal gangs have been reinvesting the hundreds of millions of pounds they make every year into their own workforce, into their own technology, and they're incredibly sophisticated. And what we really need to do is target the criminal kingpins at the heart of those criminal organisations in order to make a difference. And really, whilst the creation of a UK-wide task force that was previously referenced would see some resource dedicated to tackling these criminal networks, it will only work if it encourages collaboration across all of the industries involved in the fraud ecosystem. So this includes big tech, social media, telecoms, as well as financial services. We need others to play their role. Currently, financial services continue to bear the brunt of the responsibility in this fight against economic crime, and we have a huge part to play. After all, we're the last stop in the journey, and we're responsible for our customers' money. However, I strongly feel that the growth in fraud and scams that we've seen is a product of the problem only being given to financial services to solve, and we need many more people to be involved in that. Now, of course, financial services will continue to reimburse, and most of you will know that there's some steps to move to more mandatory reimbursement across a broader set of financial services, which is a good thing, and that's great news for consumers. Many more consumers today get refunded as a result of the CRM code than they did before, which is a great thing. However, it's not a means to an end, and the criminals are still making hundreds of millions of pounds. Reimbursement doesn't stop the money going to criminal networks. So we can't also police or arrest our way out of this problem. The root causes are too complex, and law enforcement isn't currently set up to tackle this sort of crime, especially not on this scale. So we'd like to see big tech, social media, telecoms doing their part, blocking the crimes from taking place much earlier in the kill chain than they do currently today, stopping fake adverts on social media, stopping spoof messages, stopping scam calls. All of these things can and should be cut off at the pass. Some firms are doing some great stuff. So some of you might have heard about Google requiring anyone advertising financial services to be registered with the FCA. That's brilliant. That's a great example of some positive steps that can be taken. And a lot of telecoms companies have taken great steps to prevent their services using by criminals sending multiple SMS, those fraudulent scam text messages that you see. You might have seen those drop somewhat recently, and that's because of some great steps that telecoms have taken. But we need to do more. Fraudsters adapt really quickly. They soon move to platforms with weaker controls, and all relevant industries have to play their part to secure their platforms and put their part of the ecosystem off limit to criminals. And in time, we need to find a way to share data in real time. And yes, sharing some of the cost of fraud would help too. I know TikTok here, we've had some great conversations recently about the I won't say social media platforms, sorry, the online platforms, entertainment platforms, and what they can do, and that's been helpful. But really, it might pick up on some of the points I've made, but it's through this robust debate that we can really move this topic on. So, as I said before, I think we've said we need to go further, and an untapped policy solution is the creation of a central hub, which brings together these industries that I've just mentioned, and into a hub where they can work alongside government and law enforcement. More importantly, creating a hub like this would bring the top talent from these industries. I had to think about what we could probably achieve if we brought all of the data science capability from Google, from Meta, and we used them to supercharge law enforcement in an area where data sharing was completely possible in real time. I just imagine the seismic shift we could generate in terms of combating financial crime if we could bring that together. So we really need a hive mind to tackle this and to put in place the barriers and defences that stop fraud and scams at source. Such an approach can only help, really, if it is a truly independent, collaborative kind of approach and has the necessary legal backing to enable the data sharing. But also, it might be able to unlock some of the funding. So again, Nationwide are willing to fund such an exercise, but we also think that with the right legislation change by government, that we could still untap some of that money that's been seized by financial services, all financial services are sitting on, to unlock it and start to fund such an enterprise. We believe it's better to use this money for a cause like this rather than to leave it sitting dormant in accounts sitting in financial services. So without a truly joined up approach, we risk the issue of economic crime continuing to grow untapped. And also we risk perhaps introducing a little bit more friction in the system as financial services are forced to slow down payments to be able to better protect customers. Now, we all enjoy the convenience of faster payments, and I think we'd all rather combat financial crime rather than introduce more grit into the system. Consumers deserve better protection, but it shouldn't come at the cost of convenience. So to conclude, we believe there's a role for the cost of fraud to be better shared, and the research shows that some form of government intervention does work. But as a mutual, we really believe in collaboration, and we think it's time to come together to tackle fraud and scams. So today's call to action to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And the report Jim is referring to there is an SMF report. I have a handy cheat sheet here. It's on the SMF website. I highly recommend reading that. One of the things that research, which we did in partnership with Nationwide does, is it goes to the victim's experience of fraud, and the impact that fraud has on different people of different income groups. Shows that people with lowest incomes are most likely to report a severe impact of suffering fraud. I'm mentioning this by way of introduction to our next speaker, Carla Darcy from Money and Mental Health, who I think is going to talk to us a little bit about more on that point about the impact on victims, the experience of fraud in that context. So, Carla, over to you.
Thanks, James, and thanks to the SMF for the report and for Nationwide for sponsoring this and having me along. So to tell you a bit about us, we are a research charity set up back in 2016 by Martin Lewis, a money saving expert. And part of the reason to get involved in that in the first place was he was having so many conversations with people about their finances, and so often the issue of money, of mental health, just came along naturally. So we often talk about the two forming a toxic cycle, where I think most people can understand if your financial situation isn't great, that can put a real strain on your mental health. It might be just sleepless nights, it might be just stress building up over time. There's another half to the cycle I think people are less aware of. That's when you're experiencing a mental health problem, the way that a lot of common symptoms can impact on your ability to manage your finances. So that might be things like being more impulsive, it might be things like trouble remembering when payments are due, or just generally kind of getting out of the house, getting the best deal, or memory, a whole range of things. And it's those issues that attracted us to this question of scams, to understand, was there an outsized impact on people with mental health problems in the first place? But as James was getting at, if you do lose out, what is the mental health impact of that? And crucially, what can we actually do to prevent and support people who experience that? Because we are talking about huge numbers of people. About 1 in 4 of us in any given year will experience a mental health problem. So there are some really large impacts on this. So we dug into this through our research community, which is a group of about 5,000 people who all lived experience of mental health problems. We also did some polling to get a more nationally representative picture. But from that polling, we found that people with mental health problems were about 3 times more likely to ever been scammed online, whether that's losing money or losing personal information. So that much higher risk seems, again, when we speak to people who've been affected by this, to be really closely linked to experiences of mental health problems. When your mental health isn't great, you just are more at risk. Now, obviously, we can all potentially be at risk, and as the SMF report gets into, there's no one group is affected, but that higher risk is really concerning. And it's concerning from a financial point of view. So again, if you are getting by on a low income, losing £50 or £100 can be the difference between making your bills, being able to put food on the table that month or not. So really, really high stakes. But also psychologically, where we know that people feel really stupid, they feel embarrassed, they feel ashamed. There's that very immediate effect. But we've also heard lots about the kind of the longer term and more complicated effects, where I think particularly with the internet, if you have clicked on a dodgy ad on social media, then you're going to be really nervous about ever, buying something online again. And we've heard from people who've just basically withdrawn from that and just done shopping in person. It's obviously good in some cases, but can lock you out from other opportunities and good ways of saving money. Social media, again, is often a really good way to have that social support, particularly if your mental health means that you don't leave the home as much as other people might. And again, if people feel really nervous now because they lost out to, say, a romance scam or some other kind of friendship scam online, that is, again, just disconnecting people from an incredible resource. So there's cost to individuals, there's cost to families, there's cost to businesses. So the need to do something like this is really massive. And I think when we look at what has been done, I think there has been, in the last couple of years, some promising moves, I would say. So things like the online safety bill, the online advertising program, the fraud strategy earlier this year, there are good ideas in that, and as Jim mentioned, because this is such a complex ecosystem, you can't just do one thing. There isn't a silver bullet. I think where we really want to see action taken by the current government, but also by a potential future Labour government, is actually making some of this happen. So really kind of getting to grips with some of the issues. Now, prevention, I think, is always going to be where the biggest prize is, and if we can reduce the number of fraudulent ads out there, accounts that are selling products that aren't real, or fake financial promotions, the more of those that can be taken down and stopped from getting online in the first place, it's just going to have the biggest potential impact. But on that question of how people actually experience being scammed and what can better support people when they have been, I think things like the reporting journey is really important. We hear from people all the time how they went to say the police, and because it was again a relatively small amount of money, they weren't treated with what they felt was like the level of support and the taking that issue seriously that they got. Some people felt ultimately more traumatized by then having to share that problem with others. So really figuring out across banks, across law enforcement, across a whole range of other support services, how can we best help people when they are really struggling? Things like the reimbursement scheme that Jim mentioned are really important, but there's definitely more that needs to be done to really kind of, I think, bring this on to the next stage where if fewer people are losing out, but if you do lose out, those psychological and financial harms are as little as they can.
Thank you very much. One of the defining features of fraud and fraud policy, one of the things that actually makes it interesting from a think tank perspective is it's complicated. I mean, there are so many different parts of this problem that go together, and we talk about the fraud chain. So I'm very pleased to have our next two speakers, I suppose, come from different parts of the fraud chain, at different points. So next to Sonia Brown Visa, who will then be followed by Giles Derrington of TikTok. So your thoughts on where you sit in that chain and what can be done about it, Sonia?
Sure. Thank you very much, James, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. Tackling fraud is the top priority for Visa, and the reason for that is all of the factors that Jim and Connor have articulated. I just want to throw one number into the mix, which is that we've conducted our own surveys, and 42% of people are nervous when they're actually making an online transaction about fraud and about the impact of fraud. And so that means that 42% of people are scared to going about their lives in the way in which we want them to be able to go about doing their lives. It means that businesses are probably missing out on opportunities to actually grow their business in a good way. And it means that all of us are moving out and losing out in terms of the economy and what the economy can afford in terms of public services for us all. So fraud on our network at Visa has actually fallen by 28% since 2019. And that obviously differs from the other networks and the other experiences. So how has that been possible and what have we been doing? It's largely come at the cost of a lot of investment. So we've invested £8 billion globally to reduce fraud and enhance security. And we estimate that has meant that £22 billion worth of fraud has actually been stopped. We've also been deploying AI for the last 30 years in order to actually combat fraud. So it's always one of those things that we kind of smile a little bit about the discussion of AI and fraud. We've been doing this for a long time and have a lot of experience. But there's absolutely no room for complacency because of all of the things that have been discussed so far this afternoon. We will continue to invest, and a great example of this is the deployment of tokens. We think that this is the sexiest thing to be happening in payments. Others may argue. I know. And the reason is that we think that it really improves the checkout experience, so more sales go through. And at the same time, we think it can actually dramatically reduce fraud even further. But at the same time, we don't want to stop there, and we want to leverage our experience in learning how to tackle fraud to help with the problem on other networks. So we are leveraging our 60+ years of experience in fraud prevention and introducing new products, particularly a product called RTP Prevent, which is designed to help faster payments and has the potential to dramatically reduce fraud on those account-to-account bank transfers. So whilst I fully agree with everything that other panelists are saying in terms of making sure that we stop the sources of fraud, we also need to leverage technology to the maximum to actually really help combat all of these issues. So what more should or could the government be doing? I think that the recent fraud strategy is a positive move, but I think we all can collectively agree that more needs to be done. And I think that the first thing to say is that we really feel that at the moment tackling fraud is very fragmented across government. And therefore, we really feel that fraud should become the responsibility of one organisation, which is really empowered to actually bring people together across the whole of the ecosystem. So everybody that's involved in that value chain being able to come together to create the right incentives to ensure that anyone who serves customers in payments, financial services and beyond are all at the same tables, all at the same time. That's really important in tackling this. And we've got an awful lot of experience in this through another crime, unfortunately, which is around cyber. And here we've really been able to actually make sure that everybody who has information can share data, can share insights, and actually tackle these issues to make sure that criminals in those areas aren't able to attack as often as they would like to. So we really need to think about how that same way of thinking in terms of data sharing, information sharing and deployment can actually be borrowed from that into the fraud space. The final thing that I would say is that we feel that the ambition of the government needs to be much higher. We think that the current levels of fraud reduction target of 10% needs to be raised, and we think it could be raised to up to 25%. We think that's really important to signal the urgency because this crime needs to be stopped. And I'll stop there. So thank you very much.
So just before I go to Giles, let's check on RTP Prevent. I'm sure everybody in the room knows what RTP stands for, just in case it was forgotten.
Real-time payments.
You all knew. Next, we have Giles from TikTok. I know we were talking earlier on about victims, Giles. Lots of different research will give you slightly different pictures of fraud victims, but there is a fair amount of reliable data suggesting that actually it is younger people who are especially likely to fall victim to fraud. And I hope I'm not being contentious when I suggest that TikTok's users might skew slightly younger, even maybe younger than a few people in this room. So, yes, so I presume that's a starting point to your interest in some of the users of the platform.
Yeah, although I should say, obviously TikTok is across the spectrum, but the demographics older than people would assume. But
hands up, who's using TikTok? Okay, fine, I'm wrong. You're all already young.
Very good. For those who don't know TikTok, we are a online entertainment platform specialising in primarily in short videos. We're a 5-year-old company with 1 billion users worldwide, so incredibly fast growth. And we see, fundamentally, our product is about showing people what they're interested in. So as you watch videos on TikTok, the algorithm, if you watch pictures of cats, it will show you more pictures of animals and see if those kind of things. There we go. Yeah, see, no audience. Now, what that does, obviously, is it fundamentally, because it's an entertainment platform, we want to create a safe, enjoyable space for our users. There's often this talk about I think for all social media internet platforms, the idea of, we just want to keep eyeballs on platforms, so it doesn't matter about content. I can tell you, as an advertising-funded platform, there is no one more kind of concerned about fraudulent content than big major brands who might have their content put next to potential fraudulent piece of content. So it's incredibly within our interest, and I think our whole interest in trying to tackle some of these challenges, not just on behalf of victims and actually stopping it, but also from a pure self-interest point. So I think that's important to start by saying. I think the main kind of thing that's interesting in this debate is what we see as fraudulent content on the platform. And there's a lot of conversation about kind of when someone becomes a victim of fraud. Most of what we see is not when someone is a victim, it's when they're a potential targeted victim. So if you're scrolling through, and this applies to any platform, and you see something which may look too good to be true, often it's not then and there that you're going to suddenly find money going from your bank account. A lot of the effort is to drag you away from that platform, away from safe spaces, into areas where they can use social manipulation in order to try and convince you to part with money. So what can we as a platform do about this? And we are in a kind of privileged position in some ways as a younger platform to learn some of the lessons from the past as well. So we think about this in kind of 3 Ps plus a fourth, which I'll come to in a minute. So the first one is product. What can we do at a fundamental design level to try and make it hard for fraudsters to do that social engineering on the platform? And so we've taken a number of choices which are fairly unique in our space in order to try and reduce that risk. So, for example, we don't have end-to-end encrypted direct messaging on the platform. There are other tools for that, but it's not something we've chosen to do. Similarly, and Colin talked about people clicking on links. We made the decision that within our DMs, you can't click on links. If you want to use one of the links that someone DMs you, you've got to copy it and put it in your browser instead. Again, that's trying to create the friction which prevents people from slipping into kind of, oh, that's easy for me to do. Also, when it comes to young people, I think there's a lot we can do to make sure that those at the younger end of the spectrum are protected. So, for example, between 13 and 16 on our platform, you do not have access to direct messages at all, and your account's set to private by default. People can't find you on the platform. Between 16 and 18, DMs are optional, but you have to actively go and turn them on, and we have parental tools which can allow parents to make those choices for their kids as well. Because I think people mature at different stages, and you need to be able to give that flexibility. So there's a lot we can do there. The second P is process. What can we do when there is a risk of fraud to try and reduce that and make sure people can quickly counteract it if needs be? So the first is that we take a fairly, slightly dirty word in this room, but small c conservative approach to advertising. There are lots of ways to make money. We've chosen not to take risks with certain things. So, for example, cryptocurrencies, very, very big online talk. We don't accept advertising for cryptocurrencies because we think the risk is just too high, and we don't think that the tools we can't make it safe enough to make it safe on our platform. So we've chosen for the moment to avoid that. Similarly for kind of a range of other products as well. And secondly, we've tried to make it as easy as possible to report fraud when you see it. So if you see a video which doesn't look quite right, you can hold down your finger, and within 2 clicks you can be at somewhere you can report the fraud, and then you can see it and move from that. I have to say we're actually quite proactive at doing this stuff. We don't just wait for people to report. On a sort of global level, 90% of fraud and scams content is moved from the platform proactively by us before someone reports it to us. The third, I think, and this is a hugely important one, is prevention, and it's kind of about education, right? So there's 2 things we can do here. So the first is work with government and regulators to try and make sure there's materials which kind of educate people on what too good to be true looks like. There is a huge fragmentation within this part of the process at the moment. There's far too many different organisations that kind of want to do their ads, and far too many of them, frankly, don't understand the newer platform. So we constantly get bits of government coming to us saying, hey, can you run this ad campaign? It'll be a static image, shot in landscape. It's not going to work on TikTok, and so there's no point in putting it up. So we've actually tried to work with regulators so they understand what works on the platform, how to use creators, how to use the people on the platform to give authenticity to some of those issues. And we've also tried to do things proactively so that when people are going through the platform, they can see warnings effectively. So we have something called our financial education tag. So anything which has a hashtag investment or a whole range of other hashtags which might be more at risk of there being fraudulent content there, you'll see along the bottom, get financial education here. If you click on that, you'll see videos from Citizen Advice and others just saying, hey, you should probably wait, you should probably think about, is this something which looks like it's too good to be true? And if so, take a break, understand how to identify those things. Now, all of that, by the way, is never going to be perfect. I think online spaces are like society. You can never be 100% sure of anything 100% of the time. But I think we can do a lot to kind of try to have a proactive approach. Which brings me to kind of my fourth and final P, which is partnership. And it goes, I think, to something that Jim was saying. I think it's absolutely right that we do need kind of cooperation and coordination across multiple different parts of the fraud value chains, as it were, and coming together, particularly actually with law enforcement and others. One of the big challenges in that space right now is how you can share data, often on individuals, and sometimes individuals might not be certain of committing frauds, but you have kind of a good idea. And there's big risks of sharing that data. So we have to balance personal data protection with trying to go after criminals. And one of the things we've talked about to government is right now under GDPR, if we send something to government or send something to police forces that maybe steps outside the narrow request they've given us, that can potentially be a breach of data protection. So we'd like to see some form of good actor principle applied here. So that if if the police come to us with we think this is a fraudster, we can give them that already, but we can't, but under a good actor principle, we can say, well, actually, this account looks similar, and so I'm going to give you this as well because we're acting on a good faith basis. But allowing us to have that defence, as it were, if the Information Commission or others would say, well, hold on, why have you shared that data outside of the company? So I think if we do that, we can try and work in good faith, we can try and progress some of these issues a bit further. I'll leave it there for a moment.
And your final point on data sharing, the SMF research, the Drigson sort of opinion poll shows that, to paraphrase, public opinion is quite nuanced and complex on data sharing. Some people are quite keen and some people have some real reservations. So there's definitely a useful public conversation to be had there with the public about the merits of the case you make. Our final speaker is the Shadow General, who's also coordinating the Shadow Cabinet's response to fraud, which I think does that make you a czar? Are you fraud? Warlord journalism?
Warlord, I like this.
Warlord. So with that, I'll give you Labour's fraud warlord.
Very good, very good. Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much to the Social Market Foundation for inviting me, and we've had some really interesting contributions this afternoon, and I have to say I'm very keen to speak to some of you in more detail at another stage, if that's all right. I want to thank you for the excellent work that you have done over the years to increase understanding and shape the debate in this area. And I think that it is important to have representatives of social media here as well, because I think that they play a very important part in, they ought to be able to play a very important part in tackling this crisis and have a more proactive role. I want to thank Colin and Jen for giving the time to be here. So I'm going to have more to say later about the government's recent fraud strategy, but I am struck by the statistic that's contained in it that more than 300 individuals who have got in touch with actual fraud last year were considered to be at risk of suicide, which underlines some of the things which Colin was going to say. It shows the human cost of what we're talking about and the importance of the work that's being done by Money and Mental Health and by Nationwide. So thank you. So I think that when we talk about the fraud epidemic as we're doing today, it's important to start with the basic premise, which is that criminals don't care how they make their money, really. I mean, they only care about two things, which is how much money are they going to get? That's the basis on which you make a decision. And as a result, they're constantly looking for new opportunities for their ill-gotten gains. And where their expected returns are really high and the risks are really low, and guess what? They all pitch up. And we've seen that pattern before in our country, with the surge in organised cigarette smuggling in the 1990s, where you could make a lot of money, there wasn't a lot of chance of getting caught. We've seen it in the way that we used mobile phones, transformed the way in which drug dealing has happened, and that's exactly what we've seen with the explosion of fraud in the UK over the last decade. So let's look at how the rewards have risen. According to the National Fraud Authority, in 2011, it said that the total amount being lost to fraud every year in the UK, across every sector of our society and our economy, stood at £38 billion. And that's all businesses, all consumers, charities, public sector, and then earlier this year, the latest total estimate from the UK Fraud Cost Measurement Committee put the annual losses at 219 billion. That's a increase in just 12 years. I mean, that is what we're talking about. It gives us a bit of perspective. With those annual losses, £219 billion, you could pay for the entire budget of the Department of Health and Social Care and increase its budget by a quarter. So we're talking about an obscene amount of money being stolen from businesses, consumers, and the public sector. Is it any wonder that over the last decade, fraud has become the most commonly experienced crime, and it's so clearly one of the most lucrative options for criminals? Which brings us to the other side of the equation, and the risks that face the criminals engaged in fraud, to which I have to say, I'm tempted to say risks. What risks? Again, look at the figures. Because between 2012 and 2022, the number of fraud offences committed in England and Wales has increased more than eightfold, 3.7 million offences last year. So you would expect the number of fraudsters convicted and jailed in our country to have risen by the same amount, wouldn't you? But instead, we've seen exactly the opposite. So over the same period between 2012 and 2022, the number of individuals convicted of fraud has fallen by almost 3/4. Were sent to prison for fraud last year, compared to 3.7 million offences committed. That means, let's just take a moment to let that sink in, that last year in England and Wales, it was 200 times more likely that you would be the victim of fraud than that the perpetrator of the fraud would go to jail. In other words, the rewards for being engaged in frauds are huge, and percentage-wise, the risks are basically zero. So we have to discuss today essential steps to help prevent fraud, ensure better education for consumers about scams, providing targeted support for the most vulnerable people, taking stronger action to block spoofed calls from overseas, and making sure that every social media company is taking responsibility for the scams advertised on their sites. All of those actions and many more are things that we can do and we should do. And indeed, we should have done a long time ago. But as important as those measures are, until we also fundamentally change the reward-risk ratio when it comes to fraud, by cutting the profits of the fraudsters, by breaking apart their business models, and making them prove proper punishment, and making them face proper punishment for their crimes, we're not going to defeat the epidemic. Which brings us on to what the government is doing on this issue and what Labour would do differently. So on the government's fraud strategy published in May, I was very quick to welcome the proposals it contained for countering scams against consumers and making it easier to prosecute fraudsters, not least, to be quite honest with you, because many of those proposals had originally been proposed by me. Now, my big problem with the strategy document was not the issues that the issues did not address, not what the issues didn't address, but the two biggest ones that it didn't. So firstly, you cannot talk meaningfully about how you're going to stop fraud in this country unless you have a serious plan to tackle the gangs who are committing that fraud from overseas. The fraud strategy estimated that up to 70% of scams experienced by UK victims had an international element to it. And I've obtained a copy of the internal report on which that estimate was based, and I could tell you that the figures are even worse. By 2021, more than 3/4 of reported scams were found to have come exclusively from overseas or be committed by UK and overseas gangs working together. So we know that much of that activity is organised through call centres and boiler rooms in India. And yet, when I've asked ministers whether this issue is going to be addressed in the trade deal, which they're currently negotiating with the Indian government, I've been fobbed off with absolute non-answers. Now, if that deal does not contain serious, concrete measures to share intelligence, pool investigations, and break up those fraud gangs targeting the UK from India, it will not. I mean, it won't just be a massive missed opportunity. It will also be, in my opinion, a total abdication of responsibility. And the second gaping hole in the government's fraud strategy was around fraud against the private sector, and in particular, fraud against small businesses. In 2011, according to the National Fraud Authority, fraud against business cost £12 billion each year, around a third of the overall total. This year, according to UK Fraud Cost Committee. Fraud against business cost £158 billion, almost 3/4 of the total overall. So it's the biggest part of the fraud epidemic that we face, and yet there wasn't one single measure in the fraud strategy published by the government specifically geared towards helping small businesses reduce their losses. Indeed, as I pointed out in my letter to Suella Braverman, there were 22,000 words in her fraud strategy, but the two biggest types of fraud affecting business, procurement fraud and payroll fraud, weren't mentioned once. And that's just not good enough. And my message to businesses represented here and others around the country is that Labour wants to talk to you. We want to work with you. We want to fill the void that the government has left and develop a truly comprehensive strategy that will tackle the losses facing businesses too. The biggest financial boost that we could give businesses right now is to cut the amount that they are losing to fraud. And that's what Labour is determined to do. So just to conclude, and I'm sorry if I've run over time, but you can tell I get quite animated by this. I mean, so I'm glad we're having this discussion today, because as I say, the true wonder to me is why this issue isn't discussed more, and why it isn't more central to our political and economic debate right now. After all, this is Britain's biggest and most common crime. It costs our economy hundreds of billions of pounds. It robs our public services of much needed investment. It causes misery and hardship to tens of thousands of working people and pensioners and businesses. It should be much, much higher on the collective agenda. So can I just thank you again for raising it today and giving us the opportunity to discuss it?
You may not. You may be putting thanks for us. Before I get questions from here, I can't hear the recovering journalist in Charles is asking a question. Just to check on the India trade deal.
Yeah.
The Indian trade deal takes a very long time to negotiate, so there's every chance that by the time you have to be in government.
Deal with India. I don't think what they're going to do is they're going to target a particular area of the economy and try to have a limited trade deal. And they're going to try and sign that before the next election. And what I'm saying to them is, if you want to talk to India about trade, you need to talk to them about this. And that must be a prerequisite. I mean, it has to be really.
Thank you. I know I have a question. I will, if that's all right, I'm going to try and favour card-carrying Labour members because you're a rare bunch of those. And so, what is real members? then the other bit right. So that lady there, and that's just generally, you do questions together, maybe.
Thank you. I'm Gail Barton, councillor, genuine Labour member for Burnley Council. My day job is economic crime within law enforcement. So one thing that we haven't spoken about today is the way that criminals use children in order to facilitate those funds. So I would be interested in your perspectives on that. And just before, Jim, can I just say you are one of my favourite banks to deal with professionally, so congratulations on that.
Although we are a building society. So that mutuality is very important.
Building society takes more time to say.
Banking services.
Opinions on children, you're children of fraud and gentlemen here on the front.
Thank you, I'm John Warmington. I come from Brighton and Hove, paid up Labour Party member and a member of Nationwide Building Society. Well, a brief question about law enforcement and then on to the Building Society. Is there a problem? Every time you get one of these fraud cases on the media, they say you should contact Action Fraud, which as far as I know is a trading name of the City of London Police or something like that. So,
yes.
Do they have enough resources to do these things properly? Simple question. Now, the question to the banking system is this: how does it come about? Because there are plenty of people who can't get a bank account because they don't have ID, they don't have this. How does it come about that if somebody is persuaded scammily to transfer money into that bank account, sort code, that you can never get it back? It doesn't seem to make sense. That bank account must belong to somebody of showing their passport and everything else.
Okay, shall we do the technical? Jim and Sonia, you did not very well. We'll put Jim on the spot for his knowledge. bank account identification mechanisms?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, and some suggestions raised by the DSR in their recent consultation does include changes to banking standards that will require the banks that receive the money linked to scams to refund some of that money, around about 50%. So that's a really positive step. But one of the reasons will be faster payments. So the money that is lost is moved through several different bank accounts very quickly because of faster payments and real-time payments. So unfortunately does mean that within hours of the fraud taking place, the money could have moved through 10, 12 different bank accounts and then get cashed out. So far removed.
Consumer convenience against fraud.
Yeah, it is.
Against fraud.
The good news is there's lots of some need, but when you have real-time payments, you must have real-time fraud, but that real-time fraud prevention has to work in an industrial scale. So
Hence the police question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, right. So I'm going to ask everybody else. We've got a question on action fraud. I think everybody agrees action fraud isn't fraud, I assume. So if anyone's going to get more developed thoughts on how to make action fraud more effective, but then also a question on the role of children. I'm going to take it, Charles. You're on the right. So you go first. We'll come along the panel and finish with Emily. Do you do both the answers together? Yeah, action fraud, views on that, and children.
Sure. So let's start on action fraud. I think they're under-resourced, and I think one of the challenges at Barrow is not just action fraud. I think a lot of the regulatory warning places are. I won't name them, but I was having a conversation with regulators. We really want to improve visibility of our emergency response line. We can't increase the number of calls because we can only deal with 30,000 a year, and we're not getting more money than that. So it's a slight catch-22 of, well, what's the point then? I think for us, one of the challenges with action fraud is, again, that kind of user journey or victim journey. When they're on our platform, they're not because no one's thinking like a victim. So we have on that financial education site that I mentioned, it has the action fraud number. We've had to phrase it as, if you happen to at some point in your life become a victim of fraud, then you should call this number. But no one is on TikTok going, well, I suddenly have money disappear from my account. So again, how do you get to people at the right point where they're actually thinking in that space? I think is really important. On the question of young people, I think it's a really important question. Obviously, we've seen in the past challenges with money muling and those kind of things, which I think are very, very challenging to do. I think there's two things I'm going to say here. The first is that fraudsters are incredibly resourceful and ever-changing, right? So this is one of the things we're constantly thinking about is what's the next way of trying to get to people. We have very, very good people within our trust and safety team who are thinking about that kind of risk management generally. The second part for me, though, is, as I explained before, what can we do on the product side to make it harder for children to kind of engage with that more dangerous type of behaviour? So, for example, having accounts as private by default when you're younger means that someone can't just find your name and then start direct messaging you unsolicited and all those kind of things, because you want to protect people until they're kind of mature enough to understand those risks. I think the other thing I'd say is money mules are really, really challenging one, because we will see content on the platform which is, hey, I've got a great way to make money quickly. Now that could be money muling and that stuff, or it could be Deliveroo or something like that. So you can run across the whole panel thing. That's where the kind of going into the network and understanding things is so important, because often for us we'll take a risk-based approach. We'll take things down because we think they might be fraudulent content. That doesn't mean they're fraudulent in a court of law, and actually then just say, well, we've done our job isn't really good enough. I think one other thing I'll say is very quickly is on the actual punishment point. I've spoken to regulators about fraudulent and scamming content, and they found on our platform, we've removed it. The person's popped back up again, they've changed their phone, they've changed their email, constantly taking them down. I've had conversations with regulators where like, yeah, we've spoken to them and they have no intention of stopping doing it. So you need to do more. It's like, well, are you going to put them in prison? And they go, no, it'll take us 4 years to get a conviction, so it's really your fault. It's like, well, that's the actual solution to all this, right?
So, children and action fraud, possibly not in the same sentence.
So I think on action fraud, I think there's just violent agreement on that point. I guess that for me, what's really important, and I think this goes back to one of the points that Jim raised when he was speaking, is making sure that also they've got the right resourcing, and making sure that they particularly are doing lots of different things within that organisation. Some of it is customer interfacing, but some of it needs to be very big data sets that they're effectively able to understand. And that's quite specialist skills that are quite expensive skills to effectively hire. And so I do think that that's just a really interesting area. And as far as, I think we need to, we're talking about fraud, we need to start talking about organised crime. And unfortunately, organised crime seeks out the most vulnerable people in society to effectively exploit. And so it will continue to seek out the most vulnerable people in society to exploit, which is why we will need to keep working very hard to make sure that the control system that exists in making sure that people can move money and move money safely isn't exploiting those most vulnerable people across society.
Yeah, won't have much to say on children, but to build on Sonia's point around it being expensive to have those skills, I think this is just a real common thread with so much online policy at the moment, AI policy, where wherever you are in government, you're often coming up against a lot of the same challenges, but you're in a relatively small team, and there is some increasing cooperation across bits of government, but still the budgets aren't quite there, so particularly when Ofcom gets more responsibility for online safety regulation, really making sure that it has the budget, that it has the skills and the talent it needs, and is joined across government is going to be really important. On anti-fraud, completely agree, it's not doing its job. Again, Tanya, more money is good. Finding out what happened after the case, does that incentivize you to ever report again? Just down a black hole and you don't know what happened. Do you get signposted to help with your mental health, with your financials? If this, you're going to struggle to meet your bills that month, is there any other support that comes along there? So I think there's lots of things and how it's delivered as well as making sure that there's money behind it.
So it's been mentioned about money bills. I mean, just so that people are kind of aware, just so that people are kind of aware, who got their first bank account, who may be just in the, starting out their life, are approached by people who say, can you just it's going to be some money, can we just have your bank details and we'll just transfer some money into your bank account. Don't worry, you're only going to be there a day and then it's going out again, but you can get 10% from it. And it's easy money, and these youngsters are completely naive, just think, well, what harm am I doing? But actually, they get caught, and then they're banned from having bank accounts, and that can completely blight someone's life. And people need to understand, parents need to understand, and explain to their kids, this is the risk that they're putting, that they go through. So there's not enough known about that, and there are people whose very job, again, other youngsters who will be given the job of harvest as many of your mates as possible and get them to put, and so people need to know about this. And as for action fraud, it's do you need what a name? I actually rang them. I rang them once. I was defrauded on a stupid little scam, and I just couldn't believe what I did. So I thought, I know what I'll do. Make positive about this. I'll ring action fraud, see what happens. But half an hour later, they answer the phone, I tell them about it, and they go, oh yes, there's a lot of that. That was it. Yeah, I was not alone. But obviously the idea is supposed to be, is that you collect the data, you're able to see, this sort of fraud is the current trend. These are the people who are perpetrating it. We can go behind the telephones, we can collect the data together, we can then start acting on it, and we can do it fast. But it needs a level of skill and a level of investment. And I know that these guys know, the public don't know. The public think action fraud somehow means that, if you're defrauded, then someone's going to act on it, and the perpetrators will be caught. And that is really, as I've said, there's not very much chance of that.
A couple. There's a gentleman at the back in the middle of the road caught my eye during the answers, which is very smart. So and then I come to this gentleman here, and I'll two. I'll try to get around after that. Some people may be disappointed. You're disappointed in me, but some people may be disappointed in me. So, gentleman at the back, and then this one.
Quite honestly, I'm a bit worried there's a bit of corporate hand washing here. I think if you're hosting minors on your platform, you are responsible for if they are victims of fraud, quite frankly. And if you're then made to make them whole, you will take it seriously. And you will then block legal. It's not just TikTok, It's Facebook. Facebook's one of the
So your question is, are you?
And what really I'd say to them, that's how you need to get these. Like, if you're not going to get a trade deal, this in trade deal with India and other places, and China, you need to then present to these companies. You need to use your level of power.
More responsibility now. So I'm hurrying because we're going to lose Emily to something else very soon. So I'm sort of accelerating. So you're doing there.
Jason Grove from City of London Corporation and also member of the City of London Police Authority Board. A very new member of the City Authority Board. But I take the points around action forward, and I know, I mean, given the levels of investment, we're very much trying to make that journey shorter, and it will be a lot less than half an hour these days, and also hiring in some more skills. But I think really, the question is, I'd like to take up Sonia's point, which is, I think that the idea about collaboration, taking a lot of what Jim's talking about. I work in the insurance industry in my day job. Is this a good idea that we have a body that can take in much more?
The hub idea.
The hub idea.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I think Emily may well be walking out your ashy answers, but Emily, essentially, make companies do more? Question mark.
Yes.
Hub. Question mark. Discuss.
Hub definitely. I think many of the people represented here today have levels of expertise that we don't necessarily have in the state, and it's to your advantage and to our advantage that we do something together. We'll sort that out. So yes, we need to talk more. Definitely need to talk more.
Make Charles do more.
Make Charles do more. Make Facebook do more. Make Instagram do more.
Charles will get right reply, possibly after a minute. All right. Well, I think I'm looking at the clock. We've got 1 minute left. I might actually wrap things up there because we're about to lose into a shadow cabinet meeting. So that's why I will disappoint those of you who want questions. I apologise. So what I'll do is I will ask you all to thank our panel. Thank you to.
Can I go on to reply to that?
Thank you.
Also, all I'd say on that, I think the fundamental for me of this is at what point in the change does the fraud actually happen, right? Because, as I say, what we see is a random thing saying, hey, I've got a good way to make money, right? That's then taking someone off onto Signal, Telegram, another internet site, etc., etc. That's where a lot of social manipulation is going on. That's where a lot of stuff's happening. So it's very simple to say, oh, this person should pay because it's the start place. But what is the intervention points? And that's what should be driving the conversation. If it's just someone else other than bank should pay, I think that's very, very challenging because fundamentally, that money needs accounts. That's the final point where the fraud is happening. We have a responsibility to deal with the initial stuff. That's not the same thing as on-chain.
Thank you. Everyone's had their say. So we're definitely at 30 minutes past the hour. So I do have to wrap up because we get to the deck.